Okay, so next we're going to talk about how we do speech testing. So first we'll talk about SRT and familiarization. Familiarization has an asterisk here. SRT is meant to be done using a closed set of spondees, and it assumes that you are able to run through 8 or 10 spondees, and then the patient knows them and has that close set of 8 or 10 to choose from. Recorded speech, if you're using ACD, may have an open set of SRT words. They may have anywhere from 20 to 25, and familiarization may not be possible. And so in that case, you're going to interpret the results potentially a little bit differently. Familiarization helps the patient understand the task as well. So the idea is that you present 4 or 5 spondees at a clearly audible level. So let's say the person's pure tone average is 20. So you might familiarize at 50 and say, I'm going to read you some words, I just want you to repeat them back. Ice cream, cupcake, outside, airplane, toothbrush, whitewash, bathtub, northwest. And then you drop down 10, and again, still a level that should be audible, and you give them 5 more. And then you've got a list of 15 that they already know. There are multiple lists of spondee words available. Your book has a good summary of the 10 easiest to understand spondee words. And there's really a couple of different methods for getting SRT. The first is the ASHA method, and it is very long. The ASHA method is in my experience, is one of these things that everybody learns about and then nobody actually uses in clinical practice. It takes a very long time. It requires that you present 4 to 5 words in a row at every level as you bracket and threshold seek. So as an example, you might start at 50 and present 5 words, and then for familiarization, and then you drop down 10, you present 5 more, and then you drop down another 10 and you present 5. And if the patient, you take threshold as the lowest level that the patient misses all 5 words. So if they get 3 words out of 4, then you drop it down and make it harder. But if they miss all the words, it's the lowest level at which they miss all of the words. And then there's another way of scoring it where you count up how many words they got right, and then you minus 2 or something. It takes a very long time. And there have not really been any studies that have shown it gets you results that are different in any way from shorter methods. So, I don't use ASHA in clinical practice. I don't really see it used in clinical practice. But it's out there and it is one SRT method. The one that I tend to see more often is essentially taking the modified Huson-Westlake threshold seeking method and applying it to speech. So you familiarize first with 5 to 10 words at a clearly audible level, and then you start down 10 up 5 until you find the level where the patient can correctly identify a word at least 2 out of 3 times. And it's important, especially with SRT, but to remember with pure tones too. The idea behind threshold is that threshold is the border of what the patient can and cannot hear. So, if you are uncertain about where threshold is, remember that if you go 5 dB higher, 5 dB more intense than what you think threshold is, the patient should be able to hear it every single time. So something super threshold should always be correct. And that can be a good guiding principle if you're unsure of what response to take in terms of threshold value. Okay, let's talk about word recognition scores. Presentation level is a bit of a controversial issue here. And hopefully you've read the Guthrie and Macrisey article, which does actually a really nice job of summarizing. The level that you want to present your word rec at might vary based on what your goal is or what your objective is. If you're trying to find PB Max, and PB Max is going to be the best possible score that the person can get on a word list, period, then you want the presentation level to be the most clear, the most audible to the patient. But that might not be your goal, or that might only be part of your goal. The other part of, a different goal may be, do you want to help the patient understand that at a normal conversational volume, in the best possible listening circumstances, they're still not hearing everything. Their communication function is still not normal. And if that's the case, you may want to present your word recognition list at, 50 or 55 dB, regardless of where the patient's hearing loss is. So partly it depends on what it is that you're trying to do with the word recognition list, what your goal is. Very frequently you see people use this sort of traditional 40 dB above SRT is the volume, the level, the intensity level that word rec is presented at. The Carroll and Macrisey article talks about using UCL -5. I thought about putting MCL and UCL in these slideshows, and I ultimately decided not to, because MCL and UCL can affect your presentation level for word rec, but aside from that, they're really mostly used for hearing aids and hearing aid fittings. And so I'm hopeful that you'll learn about them in your hearing aids class. But essentially, UCL for speech is the intensity level at which the patient goes. That is uncomfortably loud. And there are a number of ways to find it. You can use monitored live voice and keep up sort of a running monologue and adjust the volume. You can use recorded speech. There are scales of 1 to 7. You can ask the person to rate each intensity level as you talk to them. But there's multiple different ways to find the UCL, and it can usually be fairly quick to find somebody's UCL for speech. A conversational level is typically going to be 50 or 55 dB HL. Or whatever it needs to be to get PB Max. There's no rule that says you can only present a word rec list at one level. And in fact, some audiologists advise that you're better off choosing multiple levels. If I have a patient that has hearing loss and I present at 40 dB SL and, they get a score of 80%, I'll increase the intensity 10 dB and do the test again and see if I can get them to their maximum possible score. The stimuli for word rec are going to be word lists. So for older children and adults, typically you're going to see the NU6, which is from Northwestern University. And the NU6 has a recorded version that has the top 10 most difficult words first. And the rule with that is you can do the top 10 most difficult words first. And if they get one wrong, that's okay. But if they get more than one wrong, you have to go on to a whole 25-word list. And then there's the W22, which tends to be a little bit easier. The language level of the words is not as sophisticated. And so I would tend to use the W22 with younger children or with adults that may have English as a second language or may not be as educated. And then there's a variety of lists for younger children as well. The PBK is a phonetically balanced kindergarten word list where, they're words that you would expect a kindergartner to know. And then NU chips and the WIPI are what are pictured here. And typically with the NU chips and the WIPI, you're going to have a picture pointing response. So if you look at the lower right, where you have the 6 pictures, you have a target word and then foils. So, you know, for list 1 of the WIPY, the target word might be Coke. So, you know, you read the word list and you say, show me Coke. And of course you have comb, goat, smoke, coat, and cone as the foils that sound very much like Coke. And each book has 25 or 50 of these pages. So you say that word and then they flip the page, and then there's a new set of 6 on the next page. And it may be that for list 2 of the WIPY, the target word is actually cone. So it's a phonetically balanced list. It's 4 phonetically balanced lists that have a picture book with different foils listed. So with word recognition testing, there's typically a carrier phrase used. Say the word cat. You will say cat. Point to the cat. For SRT, there's typically no carrier phrase. It's just the 2-syllable word. Interesting thing about the carrier phrase when you're using monitored live voice, and this is something that goes back and forth too. There are 2 schools of thought in terms of monitored live voice and peaking the VU meter at 0. I was always taught that the carrier phrase peaks at 0, and then you pronounce the target word naturally, because some words are going to be softer in intensity than other words. So the carrier phrase is supposed to peak at 0, and then the target word is just pronounced. Other people will say it is the target word itself that is supposed to peak at 0 in the VU meter. So that's just something to keep in mind. For word rec, you're going to administer a certain number of words. If you're using the ordered by NU6 ordered by difficulty list, you can get away with a 10-word list if they get all 10 correct, or if they get 9 out of 10 correct. You're going to need to go to a 25-word list, either as default with the W22, or if the patient gets more than 2 words wrong on the ordered by difficulty list. If a patient gets more than 4 wrong on a 25-word list, you're supposed to move to a 50-word list. I don't know that second part is typically done clinically, but strictly speaking, it's supposed to be. For the most part, word recognition scoring, each word is scored as correct or incorrect based on the whole word. So, if the patient says a word that is close, or if, they say cats instead of cat, it's still wrong. I will tell you, I make an exception for this for the word laud. If somebody says something like law or something close, I will score it as correct. Just because that's not a word that's in a lot of people's vocabulary any longer. Then a % correct score is tabulated based on the total number of words that you gave. So if you gave 10 words and they got 9 out of 10 correct, they would have a 90% correct score. There are some word lists that are scored by phoneme, where each word has multiple phonemes and you're actually scoring phonemes correct. Those tend to be word lists that are used for cochlear implant listeners or people with auditory skills that are lower level, where if you did a whole word scoring, like an NU6 or W22 with whole word scoring, they would bottom out. They would end up at, 10% correct. And then in that case, you may want to move to a phonemic word list, or a phonemic scoring word list.